All right, guys, we are finally back. Some scheduling issues led to why it took a little bit to get you some new content, but today we thought we were going to discuss something that was a little, I guess, close to us and our hobbies outside of content creation. Juan has written a book that he has published, and I'm working on trying to get a comic published. Me, art, more focused on regarding the comic thing, and him as a writer. So, in my case, my story is a fantasy-driven story. The design and the characters and things are very important, and he could tell you about his book.
Mine's science fiction. It's called Golden Skies. You can find it on Amazon. Probably throw it in the description if you want it to take a look at it. But it just has advanced technology like force jetpacks, guns and no recoil, force fields, and it's essentially like somebody that's not religious fighting against this tyrant religious father that rules kind of ISIS style. It's really action-packed, really fast-paced work. But we thought this video would be really interesting for you guys because, I mean, art encapsulates a lot of things, right? And so the one misconception I think that I find is that when people think of art, they only think about the drawing and the sculptures and stuff, but writing also goes into art. There's many forms of art, right? I would even venture to say music is a form of art too, right? It all falls under that banner. And it ties together a lot of times, especially with him. He's making a graphic novel. That's ties into narrative, into prose, right? So it's good. So I thought this would be an interesting video. We have questions to trade back and forth.
So, like last time, I have no idea what he's going to ask me. So these are going to be very genuine reactions to everything that's going on. And we're going to take turns. So what do you got?
First one is, what's the biggest mistake you see people do when they are drawing art or when they're just getting into drawing art? You know, or maybe just your average artist. What's the biggest mistake you see?
So are we aiming towards character art with this question?
Yeah, character art.
So what I always think is the biggest problem with people with character art is it's never really like a style-based thing or whatever. Most of the time it ends up being that people they don't know when it's achieved being too much, which is kind of hard to say because it's objective. Obviously, people are going to have different perspectives on it. But most people can look at something and know when it's cluttered, whether it's character art or not. But you can see it, design of a suit, and like some of this stuff is just too auxiliary, it's too extra. I don't know what I'm really paying attention to anymore. And there's a way to make something that feel to work, but it's just a lot of people get too caught up in that element. And also overly idealizing what it is that they're creating. It's like there's a purpose behind a lot of these designs and what's going to function. So I've always thought, at least for myself, to be somewhat practical, never lose that sense of practicality. Yeah.
For sure. Well, if you want to go, you want to trade back?
Yeah, we're trading. Okay. So, my question is, do you ever think that you can write too much of yourself into a character? Or is there a line to draw?
Yeah, there's definitely a line to draw. I think this is a mistake a lot of novice writers might do, because I did this a lot when I started out, where I try to make the protagonist just a more badass version of me. And, well, that happened in high school, and that novel got rejected over 100 times, never got published. So no, it's just, you can't be egocentric about it. Like, yes, I think it's inevitable some of the characters that you write might have some traits that you have. Maybe even if it's just one trait, right? Maybe it's somebody that's completely opposite of you, but it's something will be similar because, again, you're the one writing it. But you can't make it a carbon copy of yourself. It's just not honest. And plus, you know, I don't know. I just think it's really egocentric, and it's not going to flow as well in the character because as a person that, you know, you think you're a badass, right? You're the protagonist of your own life, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to want to write how you're flawed in the work, how you're not good enough, or how you go through these struggles. You want things to be badass for you. So if you try to put yourself in the work, it's probably going to be pretty flawed, as far as story-wise.
Yeah.
Right? Because what makes a good story is a character having flaws, overcoming those flaws, going through trials and tribulations. And if you're putting your ego in there, you're going to fail.
Yeah.
So I got another one. How many hours did you practice art when you were a novice or growing up? Like, let's say when you first, let's say from the first year you started doing art to the fifth year, right? The first 5 years. Like, how often were you doing art? Like,
Drawing was almost daily at the time period. I can't say, I don't know if I considered it practice at the beginning because it was definitely just kind of a, I mean, I believe for most people the reason why they even get attached to art is it's an escape route from other things. So you kind of just do it repetitively anyway, so it just ends up being something. You're trash at it generally, whenever that's the case. And no, it was no formal anything going on. It wasn't like I'd been in any sort of art class or anything that mattered that way. I just had ideas, I put them on paper, and I enjoyed what I was doing.
Oh, so that surprises me. You weren't formally trained at first.
No, not at all.
No, okay.
No, not at all. Most of my art skills is literally me just doing it consistently. Over time, you start to just pay attention to certain things. You grab an art book from the library. They may say, hey, this works better for character art. Use these base structures to get anatomy more proportional, etc. But I didn't really see an art teacher that taught me in a formal manner or appropriately until really 10th grade in high school. Because the 9th grade one was really that overly focused. But yeah, so for me, it was just really just something that I could never really put a pencil down. It was always a good escape. So, and I catch that that's what happens with a lot of people. But you have some people, it is formal training. They have a desire and they grind down to it. But for me, it just never was like that.
I'm similar to you in the fact that I didn't have formal training. I mean, unless you consider like your average English class that you take in school. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I guess it's training in a sense, but it's not really formal training to be a writer, per se, like a fiction writer. So I also didn't. This is kind of something I've practiced since I was 10, because I mentioned this in another video where I remember I was a big fan of Pirates of the Caribbean. And I was waiting for the fucking second one to come out, and it was taking forever. So I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna fucking do it. So I got on this WordPad when I was like 10, and I started cranking away what I thought would happen. And it was complete garbage, but that's how I started.
But it's the starting place, man. So.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Oh yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I asked this more specifically based off of what goes on in your book series, but you explore some topics that are comparable to some social and economic situations that we have going on, or at least at the time that you started writing that were really prevalent. How safe is that? What are what dangers do you think come with it, and what do you think are the greatest parts of it if it works successfully?
So, I would say the greatest danger is you don't want to step on people's toes or offend them too much. Like, I mean, inevitably you might step on some people's toes with something that you create. Someone's always offended over something, right?
Oh, yeah.
But it just can't be a blatant disrespectful thing. So, for example, in my book, what I was symbolizing a lot was Western imperialism going into the Middle East, and the protagonist would be like a Middle Easterner, right? But it's set on another planet, so it's really. I also did that also intentionally to try to remove some of that aspect. It's supposed to be more symbolic than like literal with that.
Yeah.
It's mostly supposed to represent imperialism into a foreign place and getting mixed into affairs in a place where they're already struggling, right?
Yeah.
Amongst themselves and the consequences that come from that. So. I would just say, as long as you do it with respect and you're not trying to cast any, like, the people that are oppressed or are suffering from hardship, you don't cast them in a very horrible light or try to dehumanize them. And I did the opposite. Like, again, the protagonist is the people you would consider oppressed, right?
Yeah.
Here in the present day. Because I was trying to symbolize a lot of the, I would say, the ISIS problem that was a huge issue years ago. ISIS has been defeated at this point, right? But that's what I was trying to symbolize. And then obviously you have the involvement from the imperial powers, which is what happens in my book, right? You have the Northeast and the South. Originally I had East and West, but my publisher thought it'd be a little too maybe controversial to do it like so blatantly, so I had to symbolize it a little different. But plus, you can also symbolize a lot more with Northeast and South. You could even symbolize like the United States and Latin American countries, or native countries down south. You could symbolize that too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Middle Easterner and the United States. So there's multiple ways I guess you can interpret it with those geographical points I switched it to. So I guess that was good that the publisher did it.
Yeah.
But overall, just being respectful to the people that are suffering from those issues, right? You're not trying to dehumanize them.
Okay.
And then my question was, did you ever have an art rival at all? Like
a rival in art? No. I mean, there was. I mean, you only know the only person that ever really did try to say something about my position in it. But I think everybody gets dragged to art or moved to it in any certain way differently. And generally, if you're in any sort of setting where you get to be able to have a chance to compare and critique, you might catch aggression from different people. But usually that setting has been so tuned to the more professional elements of how you handle that doesn't really happen.
Right.
So, only time that I've ever really felt like that in anything was before I was in environments like that.
Okay. I remember at some point though, like there seems to be maybe a misconception though, because I think you might have touched on this at one point. We had a conversation where people that draw anime think they're better because they draw anime.
Oh yeah.
Is that a thing? Like, or?
There's people. So, I don't know. I don't know what it is that does that. I guess this has something to do with like the speed or the ability to crank out things, or just how creative that drawing space for that art design can be. But really, there isn't no style there isn't anything that's hard. Well, I'm not going to say that harder or easier. That is better in that sense. You know, me, I always graded it on the sense of difficulty, but not everybody can do everybody's thing anyways. You know, for me, I'm a character artist. I draw in what is traditionally more of an American comic style. Not everybody can do that. It's easy for me. I can draw people well. I can draw faces well. That's kind of a thing that I can do. But I hear a lot that people often can't do it. But you have these people that can achieve abstract and get across feelings and concepts through colors and whatnot. And I don't really draw in that fashion at all. So, no, I've never really had someone that I felt like was a rival in that sense.
Right.
Necessarily. Like I said, once you get into that environment where you can critique and everyone knows what it is you're looking for. No one's really after anybody because the whole aim is to grow everyone's technique around you. It kind of just defeats the purpose of what's going on. So, but yeah. So, your book is a sci-fi, which I've always touted as what personally I believe was the hardest genre to write. But just like I said, some people resonate with certain things more, so it doesn't really take much difficulty for them. But for your case, what do you think is truly the hardest genre, or at least for yourself, which takes a lot of, where's the difficulty really lie?
So for me, I would say, which is funny, like I would struggle with two genres, and one probably might surprise people. I would probably struggle with fantasy, because anytime I've tried to write fantasy, it's hard to explain. Like, there has to be like the magical elements, the magical systems. If you're gonna do magic or any other sort of power, is harder to organize, in my opinion. It's harder to structure that lore, and there's so much more that goes into that basis of it, right? Of fantasy that I think is tough to nail, which you've done pretty well, which I think is funny. You're good at fantasy, and I'm good at science fiction. But anytime I try to write fantasy, I haven't been the best at it. I think probably the reason why is because probably in the past I was trying to emulate like authors like Tolkien or like Patrick Rothfuss, right? Or these people, instead of trying to be my own person. That was like when I was a younger writer, and I was like, oh, I got to be like them. And it's like, no, you can't be like them because you're not them. You have to be yourself.
Yeah.
You might have elements similar to them, right? But you're not going to be this other person, right? I think that's the mistake I did when I was trying to do fantasy, so I fell into a lot of tropes, and it just came out mediocre.
Yeah. It is a difficult line to draw, for sure.
Right. So, but like, one thing that I've used is like for Andrzej Sapkowski, like, which is the author for The Witcher. I'll probably butcher his name because I don't know Polish, bro. But I liked how formal his writing was, and his high use of vocabulary, like highbrow scholarly type of vocabulary.
Yeah.
So I try to put that into Golden Skies. People can probably tell with that. I would say, but something that would be really hard for me to write, I could probably just not write a romance novel. Because I can do a romantic subplot, like, and I'm doing that in the second book in my trilogy, but it's because I've read a lot of sci-fi books where they have a romantic subplot, but it's like, it just adds flavor to the story. It's not really a huge part of the story. If I had to make the whole story revolve around a freaking romance, I just could not do it, man. Like, it's just too boring to me. It's like, what can I come up with? It's just two people are in love. Like, they just they just fall in love. That's it. Like what the fuck is all this, struggle for? Like, what? So I don't know. that's one thing I might even struggle with in the third book, because the romance going to last another book, the subplot, right? So it's like, well, what am I going to have to put in there to keep it gripping rather than it being boring? Because I think I fall into the trope of like, they're together and that's it, they're happy. But that's, people don't want to just see that. They want to see some sort of struggle. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to ask, well, you mentioned that in 10th grade, or around there, that's when you got more formal education in terms of art. So did you get tough love from an instructor? Or maybe even before then, like if you just had somebody that was teaching you, right? Maybe like a brother or somebody that was just teaching you art before then. Like, did you get tough love, like huge criticism? That you had to struggle to like grow thicker skin and be like, okay, hey, I gotta take this so I can be better. I don't need to get super personal about this.
Beforehand, before 10th grade, not necessarily. My brother had already been doing it, but it wasn't like he critiqued what I did, because we were kind of just in two different spaces. I had a different style, and I was only drawing that stuff. So it's only when you're in the space uniformly, everyone's having to do a project the same style, same ideas. Like we had one of what they refer to as a social issues project, which a collage of photos that we in turn end up having to watercolor after drawing as a unit beforehand and all that stuff. But everybody had a different social issue, but there was still like, there were certain things you were expected to see in it regarding the watercolor techniques, drawing, and all that stuff. So since everybody has the same thing, that makes it more likely that people can say, they can judge across what people are doing, because there's no shift in the styles necessarily as much because of the requirements. But beforehand, not necessarily. I mean, like, my brothers knew certain things that I gathered and learned a little bit, but it wasn't like that. But by the time that you do get there, you realize how intense art criticism can be, more or less in the sense of like, if somebody puts a project up, you're not going to really address anything good about it at the beginning. It's going to be everything that's bad, and it's not necessarily because you try to destroy the person or whatever. Like I said, everything's just to build their technique. But you're just picking out that stuff, because the person doesn't need to go up there with an ego. They have to understand that no matter what they do, they got to get better.
Yeah.
So now, even after all this time, there's times that I felt like I plateaued, and I just end up realizing, I just learned how to do this other thing that I consciously knew I wasn't that good at, but because there was so much good and there's a lot of praise from those who honestly are not artists, so they're a little ignorant to what it is that I'm truly failing at. But I know what I'm failing at, and if somebody else who was, proficient in a similar way as me, they would see some of those things as well. But yeah, so then you do have to kind of get used to that element. It didn't take much for me. I'm not really like somebody who gets bothered by criticism like that rigidly. But you could see how it did break down certain people. I'm not a really openly emotional type person, so I don't know. I ate it, and I was just like, okay, well, this is the information. I'm just gonna move on with it. Because the way I look at it is, the faster I fix it, the less I'll have to hear. So, yeah. But it is definitely like a shock when you just go up there and you realize, you're sitting at the desk, happy as shit. I'm like, man, this is good, and I like that, and whatever. And you throw it up there, and they're like, yeah, so you need to do this, and that coloring there is bad. I don't know what technique that was. It's like, why'd you add this to the picture? It doesn't even make much sense. And then you're just like, okay. So it kind of just, it's a sharp difference from what you expect. But yeah, you adapt, for sure.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I struggle with that. I remember one time you made fun of me because, I was reading feedback, a couple of years ago, that I got from an editor, and you're like, well, stop reading it because you're about to have a brain aneurysm. Yeah. Yeah. I remember you freaking saying that because I was getting really triggered. I've gotten better with that. But
But yeah. All right, so in a lot of genres, it's kind of hard to make a character, I don't know. Everybody's larger in life. It's sci-fi, larger than life, these technology and things like that. Even in my fantasy case, magic and all that stuff. What do you think that, no matter what genre it is, what is the formula of making a character relatable?
I would say making character relatable, just, it's a formula that's used in a lot of things, but the person the underdog, obviously, that formula, I used it myself with Malik. But I would say just not even just the underdog thing, but just having the character go through so much suffering, right? Because my protagonist, he gets tortured brutally in the worst fashion possible. Yeah. By his father's henchmen there at the religious conversion camp to accept like their version of God. And he gets whipped, he gets beat, he gets waterboarded, all that shit, right?
Yeah.
But it's meant to make you want to root for him because it's like basically like especially when you write in first person, it's like you're the character because it says I, right? So it's you, it's really you, and you're getting beat up, you're getting maltreated, and so that's what ties you in because it's like you go through all this suffering. And then you want to see this character actually win in the end. You want to see them overcome and get their fucking revenge on that shit. So I would say the way I see it, like the most effective way is through suffering. I mean, like even like let's look at even just anime, like Naruto. The scenes where you have the really sad music, he's sitting there alone at the park because everyone rejected him. He's completely alienated, right? And you feel that suffering that he feels. Yeah. And that's what makes you love him.
Yeah. I would agree.
And then my final question, the fifth one, would be, is art a skill or talent? Can you become good with years of practice in classes? Like, let's say if you just didn't know anything, right?
This has always been a shaky question for me. I've been asked this before, but it's so hard to answer it, and because no matter how I say it, I don't think it's going to ever be taken correctly. But here's the thing I say. I believe that you can use practice to learn how to do art and be an effective artist. But if there was no talent prior to that, if the person who had talent was also practicing, I just believe they're going to be better. I just don't see how that other person. I mean, like if they're working the same level of just talent and hard work together, it's just impossible. But the thing is that what I've noticed with most people, there is some sort of knack if they're really going to get that profession. Like me, I was trash at the beginning. I did have a lot more practice I had to do. But the knack I had was the ability to properly create. I understood how to formulate an idea and what I wanted. It's just I couldn't translate what was in my mind to paper effectively without knowing certain techniques. A lot of them self-taught for sure, just being ambitious, learning things like, say, grabbing books and all that stuff. But then eventually the art classes. But I do say that there was still like an inherent skill set that I could understand because no matter how bad I say I was always better than I should have been for my age, and that meant that there's a modicum of talent involved. I think you can always train anything to get good, but sometimes there's some people who walk into it realistically, they do train, and it's just not for you. It just isn't. I've seen that happen before with people. They're like, I got full-on formal training. They walked into it in earlier years beforehand. I knew a guy directly like that I could outclass off of the fact that I had just been drawing longer and I had a little bit more talent, even though he had someone really effectively try to put that effort behind him to do it, and I was better. And it's not like an arrogant way. There's people that were better than me because their talent was insanely out the roof. And I consider myself like middle of the rank when it came to me being in the art classes. You know, there was certain things I could do, certain things I couldn't do. But, you know, I just don't know how well it works using training and training only when there's not a monicum of any sort of understanding or creation or just even the feeling, because it's not even just about the logic or the technique. What happens with somebody when they create art, their brains function a lot differently than a regular person, even just how they perceive life. If you don't do that, you think very rigidly or etc., you don't have a sense of openness or whatever, you really don't have that adaptability that makes art work. You can probably appreciate it, but you probably can't do it. So, and that right there alone, I consider that part of the talent. It's just being wired different. Having that need for the expression, being able to take something and have a sense of expression, even if it's trash in the beginning, even the technique's not there. So, but I guess that's my best way of saying it. You can do it, but I feel like if somebody, like talent is still working beside you, it's probably going to be better, more than likely.
Yeah.
For my last question is, considering that your franchise is SciFi, I never asked you this before because I didn't know. I kind of just figured you picked SciFi because you were into it. Most like you watch Star Wars and stuff, so I was like, oh, he likes SciFi. But the more and more that I've seen of Star Wars and certain other franchises, there's a certain way that it affects people. Like these are some of the most, sometimes callous, but they're some of the most dedicated fans of all time. So I'm wondering, what do you think? And even for yourself, when you watch franchises or what you want yours to put on people, how does it imprint on people? SciFi specifically, what does it do? What does that landscape do?
Landscape of sci-fi. It's hard to put into words because I know what you mean with the Star Wars thing, and I feel that too. I think it just ties down to that feeling of wonder and excitement that you get when you first delve into this, this world. Like with Star Wars, when I first delved into it, I was really young, right?
Yeah.
And I had that feeling of wonder and excitement, which you can also have as an adult with anything. I mean, I've plenty of times I've replicated this in other series, and like the Red Rising series when I read it, I was just blown away. I was like, wow, like I just couldn't put the book down. Like I finished one, drove immediately to Books a Million, got another one, and came back, and I just sat back down.
I didn't know it was that quick. Too.
No, yeah, that's how quick it was, because I was like, I finished it, I was like, no, it's not enough. And so like I'd go, because I wanted to see how it would go, but it's just that feeling that feeling of wonderment, of wonder, excitement, and above all else, when you love the characters, because a lot of times it's not even the character like the protagonist. A lot of times it's the relationships like the secondary characters and the friendships they have between each other and the jokes they crack. It's just you get so invested with all that. So that's what imprints on people. That's why people love Star Wars so much, because as soon as they hear Star Wars, you get that rush of excitement that you felt when you first got into it. And that's what I would like to see with my own series, is like when you hear about the New Order trilogy, you immediately think about Malik and Kafed, like, the two like super best friends that went through war together, right? One became a man, the other one, obviously was a genius, right?
Yeah.
So I want to get that same sense of like, oh shit, or like maybe the feeling of like, oh shit's about to go down when you hear about the trilogy, because it's like you already know once you get into it, there's a shit ton of fighting. So.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Because, like I said, I think I have transformed over time into appreciating sci-fi more. I didn't really have the strong connection between some of these franchises that a lot of people did growing up. I don't know. It just wasn't the thing necessarily. But like I said, what I've always noticed was like that fervent dedication to these franchises, and I'm like, well, that has to come from something. You don't just gain that kind of love without there really being a real cause. So that makes you understand it a whole lot more, though. But yeah. So I believe that's the last question. So if you guys have any other topics you think we should question about or just discuss, or if you guys have questions for us, leave them in the comments.
Yeah.
So I guess that'll be it for us. So that truth slaps.